Goeiemôre, maar baie dankie dat julle na ons kom luister het op hierdie cool werkersdagoggend. Hier sit ons nou almal, ons is veronderstel om bietjie af te wees vandag, maar ons gaan bietjie werk ons vier hierso, vir so uur ten minste. We are talking about broad-based black economic empowerment, probably one of the most contentious issues in South Africa today. And with me, I've got on the far side Connie Mulder, he's the head of Solidariteit's Research Institute. I've got Thando Vilakazi, he's professor in economics at University of Johannesburg. And then I've got Pakamila Nzamela, he wrote that book about Brimstone, he's an economic historian. So I've got all the clever people here with me today. So let's start with you, Pakamila. Do you think broad-based black economic empowerment is a necessity in South Africa today? There's come in for a lot of criticism. I'll get to Connie now, and he's got some figures telling us that it costs the economy quite a lot of money.
Thanks, Gert, and greetings to everybody today. Thank you to everyone who's honored this morning. I'm indebted through you, Chair. And I must first say big greetings to the Gerwel family. Without Professor Gerwel, I wouldn't have written that book in that format. Professor Gerwel chaired Brimstone for a long time. And of course, to the organizers of the State Oorstefees, aangename kennis. Now, getting into the question, Gert, I think you've got to flip it around and say, what are the costs of not having
you see, that's why I said I've got the clever people here. You
black economic empowerment in this country. You see, this is the glue that has kept the country together. Without black economic empowerment, I can't fathom how this country would have looked like. Perhaps we wouldn't have had those books. Perhaps we wouldn't be sitting like this. Perhaps the artscape would have long been turned into ashes. Now, to answer briefly, in 1902, because you've coached me that is going to get into figures. In 1902, after the devastating second Anglo-Boer War, leaders under the instruction of King Edward of England met in Melrose House in Pretoria, and they signed the Treaty of Vereeniging. General de la Rey was there, General Botha, and many of them. And because of the sad and devastating effect of that war, Afrikaner people were restituted to the tune of 3 million ponte, 3 million rand, 3 million pounds in 1902 money. In today's money, you're looking at close to 400 million pounds. And that was given to people who did not total a population of 500,000. That was restitution. And South Africans have never had economic restitution except for BEE. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That's a very interesting point of view. What would you say, Thando, about the effects of BEE? People say it's only enriching the rich, the politically connected, and the poorer gets poor. The money doesn't go to them. They don't get enough opportunities either.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. And I think what challenges us in this space is that the last time any kind of serious research in this space took place was probably in the 2000s, right? And there's a phenomenal amount of academic literature that is about BEE, its failings, its challenges in the 2000s. I say this because I think that we've therefore carried a lot of those narratives with us into the current era, where, in a sense, it's a cheap article to write if you're a journalist to say it's enriched a small elite, right? Now, of course, this is a big part of the optics of the thing, and I think BEE has a huge kind of branding problem in and of itself. But if you broaden the conversation, right, one of the tremendous kind of attributes, especially in a constitutional democracy like ours, that's having something like black economic empowerment policies in place, front and center, in our face daily, is that it puts the conversation about inclusion, the idea that everyone must have a chance to play, in the boardroom. It puts it in the corridors of power. It makes you think about it even if you hate it, right? Now this is quite important because it means that firms companies, boardrooms, then start to think seriously over time about how to play the game, as it were. Now, of course, very few truly wealthy individuals have come through the system, right? And I think that the statistics are there, etc. But I do think that there's a much broader impact of the policy that is also potentially positive that we maybe are not talking about, right? So the fact that there are opportunities, although still very limited, for people who were previously marginalized, and remember that includes women, it includes a lot of different categories, right? To start to participate in the economy, right? To start to be players, to have an idea, to be an entrepreneur, and to participate. And so in a sense, I think the conversation is very much about BEE as the policy. But I would like us to speak more about it as BEE with small letters. Empowerment, transformation, inclusion generally. I think that's where the conversation probably needs to lie going forward on this issue.
Connie, you've got some serious issues with triple BEE. Do you think one can compare the policy of black economic empowerment with the policy that helped Afrikaners on their feet after the Boer War, after the 30s with the Arm Blanke vraagstuk, after the National Party came into power? Those people were economically empowered. Do you think one can compare the two?
First, good morning to everyone. Good morning, Bakamatsa. Good morning, Dr. Vilakazi. I just have to warn you, I'm from Pretoria, so my English is like airtime. At some point, it's gonna be finished.
Don't feel alone. Don't feel alone.
So I'm gonna try, but if there's a lekker or a gooi somewhere, that's just normal. Coming out. Okay, let's discuss where we are at the moment regarding this policy that had certain goals, and I would argue that has spectacularly failed in meeting any of them. The goals were lofty in the early 2000s. It said, look, we've got a problem. We've got a massive amount of people who are excluded from the economy. Now, that's a valid problem, as we have an issue with people not working. And therefore, we're going to enact a policy that specifically focuses on reducing black poverty, black unemployment, and inequality. Now it's 20 years later, and all three of those metrics have gone backwards. The policy, it's not that it has moved the needle a bit, it has literally worsened most of those. We've got more unemployment than we had, specifically black unemployment is higher. Well, so the whole of South Africa has gotten poorer, GDP per capita has dropped, and inequality has widened. With the actual interesting statistic, it has not widened intergroup, it has widened intragroup. So the most of your inequality at the moment is within the black population group. It's no longer between population
Sorry,
groups.
can I just interrupt you? Do you think this is wholly the fault of triple BEE, or is there some other forces at play?
Let me just finish. So, in short, it means whatever we've done with this policy has not worked. That's the point that we're trying to make, is the goals that it set out, it simply has not achieved. Then a reasonable person would go, maybe it hasn't worked. Let's say the city of Cape Town says, we've got a massive seagull problem, and it enacts a policy that anyone can shoot a seagull whenever they want. And 20 years later, the seagull population has tripled. Then a reasonable person would go, maybe this policy has not done what it should. Maybe it hasn't worked. And I think that's where the gist is. We do have, and as South Africa and Solidarity, we've repeatedly been on record saying, we have a moral imperative to address poverty in this country. We've got a massive problem. We've got a massive unemployment problem. And if we think it's going to go away, it's not. No person with a heart of flesh can drive past a robot and see adult men and women begging and think that this isn't something that should be solved. We're just of the opinion BEE has not done that. What it has done, and that is what we can see from the numbers, at a massive cost to the economy, it has enriched such a small elite who have very successfully transformed tax money into Lamborghinis. And the rest of us have gotten poorer, quite simply put. So we should simply first start by making it easier. And the way we get out of it, and that's why we can have a long discussion about this policy and has it worked, has it not worked. We're not convinced that dwelling on the past, especially the past 20 years, is that useful. Let's talk about the next 20 years. Where do we go? How do we make sure that my son, who's now 8 or 9, actually has an economy that he can work in, that all of our children and grandchildren can somehow find employment and better themselves and make sure that their children have a better life. And that's why we've repeatedly stated, we've been accused, and I'm most likely going to be called a racist by someone within the next hour. We're not longing for a past under the National Party, by all means, please not. We don't want that back. But we're also not that excited about a future under the ANC. And as a country, we've seen we've suffered immensely economically, and it's just not necessary. We know what we need is we need growth. We need economic growth that leads to a reduction in unemployment for everyone, not just for certain races, for every certain person in this country. And there are ways to get there. It's not rocket science. We know how to do it. Internationally, we've got several examples of countries that have done it. BEE is simply not leading to that, and that means we need to revisit this policy and say, okay, this isn't working, what now?
Just the one question, can one compare it to the steps that were taken to empower Afrikaners?
I'm not convinced. The context differs dramatically. It's 100 years later, things look drastically different. It's a very dangerous game if we go comparing with different time periods, because then we can go back to 300 years ago, or should the Romans have compensated the Gauls, etc. So I'm very, very hesitant in trying to do a direct comparison, and I'm honestly not that interested in doing direct comparisons. I'm simply looking at the numbers at the moment, which is this policy is making all of us poorer, except for a very small elite who have gotten immensely rich at the cost of every single one of us.
Pakamisa, you don't agree. You think we should compare that?
I mean, really, after the fact, you know, when you've eaten and you're like, actually, that pizza wasn't nice. It was terrible. I mean, life doesn't work like that, to be serious. Really. But I'm going to respond to what he's saying. Triple BE is a microeconomic policy. It is not a macroeconomic policy. It's a small element within a bigger economic system of South Africa. Now, you can't scapegoat a micro issue. This country has faced a lot of economic headwinds for a number of reasons. Some of it has been due to corruption, yes. Some of it has been to mismanagement of the economy. But there have also been global issues that have got nothing to do with triple BE.
Like at the moment.
Exactly. I mean, Trump is bombing people, and we're going to say it's BE. You know, maybe I'm too petty, but it reaches the point. Now, people, I mean, Doc likes saying only a fraction of people have benefited. You have to ask them, what is that fraction equating to? How many people, if you say a fraction, so that we can come back with the real figures and say, no, you're on point, or no, it's a lie. So I'd like to challenge Doc to give us that fraction so that we can use proper research to demonstrate that that fraction doesn't exist. That actually, people who are not connected politically, I studied through a bursary, not connected politically. I mean, the company that gave me a bursary got skills development points. I pay taxes today, and whatever change I have with my wife, I give back for other people to benefit. That's black empowerment. I sit in a trust, an education trust of engineers as a trustee. That engineering company gets BE points. We've taken a lot of girls through university. Some of them are medical doctors today. Some of them are accountants. These are people that are not counted in Doc's fraction. So I'd like to challenge him to give us the fraction that he's talking about. I'm going to shoot straight to Brimstone. You know, I was privileged enough to access documents for an academic study. They never vouched for the book, by the way. The chairman of Brimstone is here. They vouched for an academic thesis. I filtered the share register, right? Just on the Cape Flats. Just on the Cape Flats. I searched for popular surnames. I couldn't find them. But there were shares, 2 million shares were held by people on the Cape Flats and in neighboring townships. There were people who were sitting in other townships in South Africa who were holding Brimstone shares. I didn't do that calculus for those. I just focused on the Cape Flats. In addition to the 2 million shares held by ordinary people on the Cape Flats, I went to do another count. I looked at what they call the Brimstone Empowerment Share Trust. Again, another 2 million shares is held by NGOs, mainly in the Cape, but they are national. They help children with chronic issues. You can go and read the annual report, Doc. Those dividends, 2 million shares at 40 cents per share. That's the dividend that was paid by Brimstone this year. You're looking at about 600 to 700,000 rand, right? Accruing, 800 accruing to those 2 million shares. That is an annual endowment. And Brimstone has paid dividends. I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years that they didn't pay dividends, including COVID when the bank stopped them. But those amounts have accrued and benefited, a lot of people. So I think it's a lie. It's a tale to say that BEE has benefited a few.
Your comment, please, Tando.
Yeah, I think this is interesting.
You're sitting in the middle.
I'm actually just going to watch. I'm actually just going to watch. I think we're distracted as a society on this conversation. Firstly, I think you make an important point, and this is actually precisely the point, is that BEE was never South Africa's economic policy strategy. That's not how the economics of it works. It doesn't shape monetary policy, it doesn't shape trade laws, it doesn't do any of the big things that move economies, right? What it sought to do is it said, in a capitalist democracy like ours, we must broaden the pool of people that get to participate in it, right? And we'll do a range of things that have to do with the economy itself, so the ownership of firms, the participation in where money is actually made, Sandton, these days Stellenbosch, etc., right? How do we make that representative? But it also importantly, and if you read the DTI's BEE policy strategy of 2003, it is very clear there's the economy, right? But there's also corresponding policies that must come with. What are we doing in communities? What are we doing with labor law? What are we doing with skills development so that everyone has a chance to even start the race on the same footing, right? The concept of inequality and poverty, I think I disagree with some of the numbers, right? Some of the poverty measures have come down in our last 20 years, right? So we must also use the facts in that regard. But perhaps more importantly to remember, and I think this is missing in the conversation on black economic empowerment, is that inequality as a measure, no one has to be an economist, just bear with me here, right? Measures the difference between the richest and the poorest at the level of income, right? Now, that thing widens, that measure widens, even if nothing changes in the lives of the poorest. That means if the rich get richer, right, inequality also widens, and we do not discuss that. What's really happened is that we probably have, in the IMF has done a study on this, we have some of the highest rates of corporate profitability in the world. So Sandton is making money, right? Money is being made in this economy, but you have widening inequality, right? Low levels of reinvestment, no economic dynamism, etc., right? Now, all of that is actually truly part of the growth story. You can blame it on BEE, right? But actually, the profits sit somewhere else. There's retained earnings, there's money that's not flowing through the economy, and I think that's where the conversation ought to start to go over time.
Connie, I read your report last year that you brought out about triple BEE. You said between 145 to 290 billion are actually lost due to BEE, and that represents 2 to 4% of GDP. And it reduces GDP growth rate by 1.5 to 3% per year, and we've lost 3.8 million jobs because of that. Will you care to explain that? And then I would like the other two gentlemen to reply to you.
Yes, I would first like to reply to them if possible.
Okay, that's fine.
Firstly, Pakamatsa, thank you so much for bestowing a doctorate on me, but I'm really not a doctor. I'll take it. I'll write it in my CV from now on, but no, I'm not. I don't have a doctorate. Let's just talk about. You're 100% correct. It's not macroeconomic, and I never said it's the only thing driving growth or reducing growth. South Africa is beholden to commodity cycle always because we're a mining. We all used to be a mining economy. So what we can discuss about it is that what impact does it have? it's not going to drive everything. You know, South Africa is a very open economy. The world sneezes and we get a cold. That is we can see that now with oil going up, is all of us will be paying about 3 rand more a litre coming Wednesday, and diesel is going to go about 10 rand, I think, or a bit more. So no, we're beholden to the international. What does need to be explained, however, is why we're lagging behind all of our peers in terms of economic growth. And that is something that is weird, is every single country that used to be in line with us, Denmark, etc. South Africa had an economy the size of Denmark in 1994, and we've dropped almost 27 places in total economy in the world. We've gone backwards. So we can talk about what's going on. The reality is this country has not grown economically at the rate that its population has grown. And that is why GDP per capita is coming down. In short, the politicians are writing checks that the economy can't cash, as simple as that. We can't absorb people that are coming into the labor market, and we see that with 40% unemployment, etc. So our question should be almost recklessly focused on how do we get this economy growing. And from our perspective, deterring foreign investment, which BEE does do, however, according to the World Bank's report, does not work. It's not going to increase growth. It just doesn't do it. The second part is increasing the cost of compliance. Now, we can talk about this. It's a whole section, and that is what our report specifically highlights, is what is the cost of compliance for a company doing business regarding this regulation? How do they actually comply with this, and what do they need to spend? And we analyzed, using the BEE's Commission's report, JSE's payroll numbers, and Stats South Africa's economic data, and came to the conclusion that the cost of compliance is somewhere between 150 and 290 billion rand a year for the economy to comply with this policy, which represents between 1.5 and 3% direct costs. Now, not all of this is lost. We explicitly state that in the report as well. Is much of this is skills development, which is wonderful, and if we can do more of that, that would be amazing. If we can actually start training young people and making them employable, that would be wonderful, because South Africa does have a massive skills shortage. That would not be lost money at all, but a lot of it as well is equity transfers and just general cost of compliance. So the estimate is, very conservatively put, that this deters about 1.5 to, let's say, 2% GDP growth per year, because we have to comply with this policy. Now, the question isn't, what is it? Every policy has costs. We have a police force that has a cost. We're not going to bother about the cost. The question is, does it actually warrant that cost? Are we getting the benefit that we should from that? In South Africa's terms, all countries we have a military that costs a certain amount of tax money, but we get a benefit from that, so we're okay with it. We're saying, all right, this is something that's worth spending the money on. And that is the conversation we should be having. The conversation, we agree with you, is we have a massive moral imperative to solve poverty in this country. It's almost crazy to think that we don't have to. We have to solve poverty and we have to solve unemployment. This is just not the vehicle that does it. We need to do, so that's why Solidarity's position has been, for the last 20 years, 10 years, first 10 years we gave it a chance and said, let's see what happens. And then the metrics went and said, this is not going to work. We were worried because the design wasn't a good one, and other international examples quite simply failed at this type of policy. So now we're in the situation where we're saying, we can't do nothing, but we have to do something else. This has not worked. It has not reduced unemployment meaningfully. Poverty, we can argue about the metrics, but it has not reduced poverty. South Africa, in terms of GDP per capita, every single one of us is poorer today than we were 20 years ago. That's the reality that has happened. And we can talk about anecdotal evidence where it works, and we know there are several examples of it working, but for a country's economic situation, it's not working. It simply isn't. And we can pretend it does, but it's not. And when we talk about a small fraction, Prof. Gumeri did that sum for us. He said about 46 individuals got 60% of all of it. Yes, exactly. Got 60% of all the BEE transactions in the early 2000s. That's a massive amount of money that has been transferred. If we're serious about where has it gone, well, we need to talk about the whole racial dispensation galaxy that South Africa has, which is BEE, then employment equity, and then preferential procurement. And these three systems together should have, if these policies work. So their aim is reducing black poverty, black unemployment, and inequality. That is the stated goal. These aren't bad goals. This is something that should happen. We should reduce unemployment, we should reduce poverty, and if we can, we should reduce meaningful inequality. It's important. Just to add to Prof. Vilakazi, the irony is, if your economy is growing, very often growth gets accompanied by widening inequality. for the simple reason not all people grow at the same length, same rate. Anyone who's had a sibling would know that at some point you grow faster than they do, and then. But when I say meaningful inequality, that's what I mean. When we look at the metrics, and this is not our numbers, this is Statistics South Africa's numbers. This is the numbers that the ANC uses in Parliament. This policy has not moved the needle on those metrics. Some of it is macroeconomic, that's true. We had a slight power crisis for those people who still remember. Every now and then, I still at exactly 6 o'clock, I just go switch my power off to be back in that comfort zone of having load shedding, because no, it's a weird place to not have it. But then you have, why did that happen? And it's corruption, true, but in the Zondo report, it states that a large part of enabling this corruption was the fact that BEE contracts could be transformed. Now, obviously, well, transformed is not the right word, corrupted or changed. They could use this policy as a way in to steal, simply put. And we have members in Eskom who would tell you it's openly what's happening. It is exactly the things, but that is what is happening. Is it the way the policy should be implemented? No, it's not. Obviously, it's not. But ultimately, as Dr. Saul, the economist of America, has stated, policies aren't measured by their intentions. Policies are measured by their outcomes. And we need to measure this policy harshly by its outcomes, simply stated.
Pakamisa, I don't think you agree with everything. Before I have your reaction to that, didn't we start at a huge disadvantage in 1994 because we had this huge poverty in the country, and the ownership of the economy was completely skewed, and that had to be corrected. Has that been, in a way, corrected since?
Not only skewed, the country was bankrupt in 1994. Let's also concede to that. Fallen flat, corporates were inefficient, they couldn't invest properly, and the macroeconomic policy that unfolded, Gert, actually made corporates efficient, created a budget surplus in this country. It's a lie to say people are poorer than 1994. We must travel the country. The Human Development Index, which is developed by various institutions, and the doctor can speak better than me. The one next to me. The Human Development Index stats show, right, that people who never had housing have housing. People who never had access to education have education. People who never had health facilities have health facilities. People who couldn't enroll at Matis or vets or Takis, can now enroll. So it's a total lie. I am not insensitive to the poverty that is staring us, because it is really dangerous. So I think there's been a change in this country, and there's an academic who studied the first 15 years and the second 15 years, and he explains the mismanagement in the economy that we took off smoothly, peaked. After the 2008 financial crisis, we struggled to maintain the jet flying up for a number of reasons. Some of them are global, and some of them are self-inflicted. And triple BE is but a small thing, it's very small. But to respond to Connie, I've taken back the PhD now. I was being gracious. Prof. Gumede is so much under pressure today. I respect him. He is so under pressure for coming up with, thumbed up stats. He can't mention the 40-odd people that have benefited from R1 trillion. If you ask him now, mention them. He won't be able to give them to you. And if you say to him, can you compute all the BE deals that amount to R1 trillion? He is not going to give you a list of those BE deals. He struggles. Now, I'll mention something about concentrated wealth, because I watch the markets every day. Wealth in this country is not concentrated amongst a few black people. they are just a small drop in an ocean. If you look at the stock exchange news service, I have never seen a black person, single black person selling shares worth 500 million or 200 million for that matter. But it happens a lot of times, you know, with white captains of industry. You see it. I mean, it's there out there. That should tell you something. The JSE is worth about 20 trillion rands today, between 20 and 23 trillion rands. Even if you were to use Prof. Gumede's trillion, right, which doesn't exist, and you compare it to 20 trillion, still, even if black people had acquired 1 trillion rands, that would be unacceptable after 30 years, because that's still small if you look at the JSE. Now, I want to talk about economic growth. It's absolutely false that BEE has taken the fees out of the economy. Absolutely false. The bulk of the deals, pardon me, the bulk of the deals were done between 2005 and 2015. Now, they matured in 2015, but they were done in 2005, the bulk of them, in various sectors. The economy was growing at between 3 and 6% at that time, firing in all cylinders with triple BE at its peak. Triple BE is not at its peak today. A few deals have been done compared to 2005. And the economy is on the downside. So the math there doesn't math, Connie. On the issue of equity transfers do not happen every year. It's a lie. It's been a while since equity transfers have happened to individuals of a few consortia. Equity transfers that have been happening have been going to employees, have been going to NGOs, community trusts that educate people. If that is a sin, Connie, to do such equity transfers to build this economy, then I don't know. I'm gonna conclude. You know, people say that triple BE spooks foreign direct investment. It's a lie again. Because when the deals were done, South Africa experienced the most foreign direct investment from internationals when BE was at its peak. Now in America, they've got something called the Minority Business Development Agency. It operates under the Trump government. It's a black capitalism initiative. It is there under Trump. You must go and check it. It started as the Office of Minority Business Enterprise in the 60s. Richard Nixon was under pressure when he was campaigning. He could see the violence because of disenfranchised black Americans. And when he got into power, they started this thing called Office for Minority Business Enterprise, OMBE. A bit of sharing there with BE. And they funded black enterprises, trained them, and so on. He can't come and tell us here that we cannot effect triple BE when he has an agency in America that funds minority business interests.
Doc, I would like you to react to this, so let's have the doctor speak.
Thanks, Gert. Yeah, I mean, I won't haggle a bit about the numbers here, but I in my other life, I also am a kind of political economist in a sense, because I've come to understand that you can't understand the economics without the politics. And this question of social cohesion, which a policy like this and a range of other policies engender, is absolutely critical to the success of many a successful economy, right? I think what we miss in those discussions is that in every single economy, and there's an economic historian, Alfred Chandler, that writes about this, of the kind of leading economies. He compares Germany to the Koreans that have done well, to America, etc. It says, yes, we're all operating in largely capitalist economic systems, right? But each of those societies, and he distinguishes them, each of those societies has set its own rules of the game in terms of how capitalism will work in each society. The Germans said labor matters. We want labor in boards. We want labor being part of the ownership of firms. Other countries did it differently, right? And so in any event, right, South Africa has set the rules in terms of how its capitalism ought to develop. And it simply said, we want it to develop with our people being part of it. Now that cannot be, to use Paramisa's word, a sin, right? In any event, it hasn't done so, because if you look at the figures, just on the ownership component, in terms of transformation of listed firms on the JSE, for instance, we're still haggling about whether the number is like 20% after all this time, right? Some say the number is much less, but no one ever says this number is point is 20% black ownership or transformed ownership of the leading capitalist structure in our society. Now that cannot be reflective of a society that we want, right? Interestingly, if you flip the coin a bit, I think there's some very interesting things happening in the society around this, and there's something that has been built in this 20-year period. I spend a lot of my time in the research center interviewing firms, companies, SMMEs that have tried to build something and try to compete in the economy, right? And the challenges they talk about, right, including black-owned firms, is slightly different from what we're talking about. They say, for instance, and I'll tell you the one story of a firm called Makamisa. They say, I manufacture, you know the little sachets you get when you buy your takeaways with your sauces and stuff, right? I have an industry international level plant that manufactures this. I built this business myself. It's in Johannesburg. And he said, I tried for years and years and years to get the big firms, Shoprite, Pick n Pay, to list my sauces, my bottled sauces that I make, right? As a black entrepreneur. No, for multiple years. It took him to go to a forum like this, put up his hand, and the CEO of Pick n Pay was sitting on the stage, and he said, don't say you're doing transformation, because that's what he was saying, right? I've been trying to get you to list my products for months, years and years, right? Within 2 weeks, because he embarrassed him on stage, they listed him, right? So that also tells you that the barriers to inclusion and economic participation are far more dynamic than whether BEE has enriched 46 people or not, right? William Gumede, I was on a platform where the BEE commissioner 2 weeks ago was talking about this, and he stood up, he said, Mr. Gumede, Professor Gumede, tell us about this 46 and where it comes from, right? So I think we must be aware of what makes good headlines and rather start to unpack what's substantively happening in the economy. This book we wrote, and really what it does is it tells stories about what it actually takes to come into an economy like this that's held out of Stellenbosch and out of Sandton and try to make it, whether you're white, black, woman, or otherwise, right? And it's incredibly difficult. Those are the things we ought to be talking about, rather than necessarily whether BEE as a policy structure is the primary barrier to
So
transformation.
you still think there's a lot of stories that we do not hear about?
I
And do you
definitely
think the media treats it in too simplistic a way?
100%.
BEE.
I
So
think
we
that's a
should-
brilliant question.
Mm.
I do. I think it's easy to write about this. Some of the issues are, of course, important parts. Corruption and what's happened around it is absolutely important to also solve for, right? But we, much like our Springboks, we like it when we win our World Cups and it's Sia who's the captain, right? We've got in a whole society, black, white, whatever color you are, to say those are my people there. That social cohesion aspect. And so you would want that of your economy as well. But that's not a nice story to tell. It doesn't catch, right? But there are real stories here. I mean, another firm that we've interviewed called Soweto Gold. He used to be a master brewer at SAB. Or over the years, he's got his master's degree in making the stuff, etc. as a black. And he said, I want to build a beer brewing company that will sell to the mass out of Soweto. He called it Soweto Gold for that reason, right? And he did everything, he invested, he had funding, all of that. And then ultimately he had to sell out the business. Why is that? Because he found that once he got into that sector, despite the quality of the product and all of that, despite all the investment, it was actually SAB that set the rules about who puts beer on a shelf, who controls the tap in a bar, right? Those are the types of constraints that prevent us from telling different stories about BEE. That's, I think, where we need to start thinking if we're looking forward.
Connie, I would like your response to that, but I would also like you to say, do you agree there are a lot of barriers still in place that prevent people from entering the economy, especially from the, let's call it the previously disadvantaged groups?
Okay, let me just first, luckily I wasn't called doctor this time, so I don't have to start there. Thank you, Pakamatsa. It's a nice tactic, is just saying everyone lies whose data differs from you. I don't agree with that. We're cognizant of the fact that some of this policy has worked, and we've admitted that. But when we look at the broad cost of it, we just don't think it's worth it, quite simply put. I think there are much better ways of actually enabling economic participation, because the ultimate economic exclusion is not having a job. We're talking about entrepreneurs, that's such a small fraction. Most people would be somebody getting a salary or a wage, and we don't have to argue about that number. Less people have jobs now than they had 5 years ago. Less people have jobs now than they had 10 years ago. Well, less percentage of the population. The question then is, does BEE help or hurt this? Does it increase employment? Does it decrease employment? From what we can see from the numbers, based on our peers, international, other economies, our size, our sort of situation, we've got a problem. We're not growing, and we can't quite figure out why. You're 100% correct. The math isn't mathing, but your dates aren't dating. The initial BEE was in 2003, but then in 2007 the Codes of Good Practice came, which suddenly changed the whole scorecard. So all of those initial deals where Patrice Motsepe became a multimillionaire and Cyril Ramaphosa, etc. Yes, the economy was growing at that point. After that, however, after 2007, 2008, we hit the snag with the subprime mortgage crisis, but we never really recovered where the rest of the world did. And the question is why? Why didn't we recover? What is different here? Well, how do we get out of this low growth cycle that is creating unemployment and more poverty? And is BEE helping us get out of it, or is it hurting? That is the question we should ask about this policy repeatedly. Are we saying it's the only thing retarding growth? No, South Africa has so many problems. We've got a lot of problems. It can't be the only thing, but it is most definitely, and that is what the data shows us, it is not increasing employment, and it is not decreasing poverty. It just hasn't done it. How we know that is when there wasn't these strict policies from 95 to 2005, where they didn't have it. South Africa grew phenomenally at 6%, but we also decreased unemployment from 30% to roughly 22%. So we saw a real decrease in unemployment in those early years. Now, part of that, and that's why we had UFIR, is because sanctions were lifted, and suddenly South Africa came back into the world. But the first 5 years could be explained with that. After that, we still had a bit of growth under gear, and then suddenly we went full state control of the economy, or trying to control the economy, which led to significant retardation in economic growth, simply put. If we're saying that a policy does not have a cost, that is just false. All public policies have a cost. If we're going to argue saying it doesn't have any cost, that's not true. It does have a cost. The question isn't does it have a cost? The question is, does the cost outweigh the benefits? From what we can see from this policy, it simply doesn't. What I want to speak about, however, is social cohesion, because I think that's critically important. Really it is. As South Africans, we have a 300-year-old question that we need to answer, which is, how do we live together in this piece of land without oppressing one another? We haven't succeeded in that for the last, I think, 350, 360 years. We just haven't answered that question. From what we can tell, this current policy is not going to do it either. We need a different answer. We need people to be working. We need to have the poor, unemployed young black man in a township actually have a route to being middle class, which does not include becoming a corrupt politician, because that is the easiest way to do it at the moment. How do we get that person to have the house, the white picket fence, the 2.5 kids, and the dog, and be able to send his kids to college and do it? What we have become, and it is ironic, the ANC in a 1992 document that they wrote, The Case for Affirmative Action, explicitly states that we need to guard against this policy, changing us into a nation of bean counters who constantly do mental math in our minds to see, is the right amount of skin color in this policy, in this team, in this company, etc. And I would argue that that is exactly what we have become. We now have, at school tournaments, you have a referee who explicitly counts skin color. That's their only job. They stand next to the field and they make sure. We actually had a netball team, the Mpumalanga Sunbirds, who were kicked out of the final because there had too many black players on the field. We now had a cricket team who got kicked out of a final because they had the wrong type of black bowler for a while. This is the country that we've become. Now, social cohesion does not benefit from policies that enable that type of thinking. Where should we be going is we need to be thinking, let's get everyone into the economy, meaning reducing unemployment. Let's get people working. If South Africa works, when South Africans work. It's as simply as that. Any policy that retards growth, and this is not us saying it retards growth, this is the World Bank saying, look, what has happened with this policy is it has become so complex, it has become excessive, and that means who it actually nails, and that is the irony of this, is large corporates can comply because they've got the money, but small, medium enterprises who grow are the ones who suffer from regulatory complexity, and they're the ones being kept out. So what we're seeing is, you're 100% correct, Doctor. You've got the large corporates who want to keep the system intact because it keeps their competitors out, simply put. Because it's too complex and too expensive for a small and medium enterprise to actually comply with this policy and enable competition. And that is the thing that has been repeatedly said, is our competition is not dynamic. That World Bank report states that what we need to do is we need to get the market more competitive, and we've got excessive regulations specifically regarding this. We've got the Chinese saying, look, your BEE policy is retarding our investment. We don't know how to comply with this. So it's not making it up. This is not Solidarity stating it. We're stating what other people are saying this policy deters foreign investment, which, if you follow deductive reasoning, most likely increases unemployment and decreases, and increases poverty. For a country with 42% unemployment, we need to very, very seriously start making radical changes to whatever we are doing. If we continue on this route, we're going to be in a very, very dire situation. Let's say the Afrikaans word is a swear word, so I won't say it. But but we're on. Let's say we're on our way to a very bad place. And if any policy at any point deters, increases unemployment or makes it more difficult for someone to do business here, we need to have a very, very harsh look at that policy and say, is this worth it? Because the reality of that is, somebody's going to have to be standing at a robot for that cost and begging if we're not increasing employment.
Tando, you seem to be burning to answer. Connie there.
I'll be brief here. I mean, I happen to also work in a space where, so I'm a competition economist, and I kind of watch markets and the conduct and the behavior of firms. And on the cases I sit on at the competition tribunal, you also get to see large firms and corporate culture in South Africa with its pants down. You start to understand how our firms think, and obviously largely, by and large, the firms you deal with are typically historically white-owned firms, etc. Right? And I think we would be dreaming if we said their biggest problem is BEE. It sounds, Connie, like, to me it sounds like what you're crying out for is actually an economic policy strategy for South Africa, right? And I say this because, and maybe I'm wrong, but we'll see, but you could wipe out BEE tomorrow. No, it's public holiday. You could wipe out BEE on Monday, right? Government could wake up and say, we're done, right? And I have a hunch that you would not have economic growth in South Africa. I have a real hunch, right? And I'll tell you why, because the other data shows you that you do not have a dynamic, competitive economy, right? I deal with cases all the time where you've got firms, usually colluding in cartels and things like that, rigging the economy, rigging the price of bread, which is also what shapes poverty, right? For their own profit and benefit, right? This is not in the conversation I think it ought to be, right? You have firms that say, I'm a monopoly. I benefit from keeping others out, right? And when you look into South African firms, right, there's data I was privileged to see at a recent conference in Stellenbosch, right? The levels of economic dynamism and innovation in our big firms that are saying, if you take away BEE, we'll do growth for you, right, is very low. They are not competitive globally, right? They cannot blame that on BEE. We don't have a dynamic economy, right? What will give you a dynamic economy, and this is where there's a scholar called Atkinson, Tony Atkinson, that writes about inequality, is that economic efficiency and economic equity can coexist. It's not an either or, right? What you need in South Africa is a broader base of competing firms. It so happens, because of the population distribution, that some of those firms must be black owned. It's just logical. We want more SMMEs, we want more innovators employing people, etc. It just so happens some of those are going to be black owned. That's the economy that you probably want to build, right? Maybe just lastly on this, there's an interesting anecdote about these share ownership transfers, right? And in one of the cases, and I think it involves Pioneer, that was at the Competition Tribunal. They've reported, right, and the stories are few and far between, but this is how we change the narrative, we build the stories, right? They've reported that actually internally, what it's done for their company to have their labor start to be part of the owners of the firm in terms of the share distribution has actually increased productivity. It's actually enhanced cohesion within the workplace. And they're very glad that they did the deal that we forced them to do out of a competition decision, right? The point is that there are counter narratives. It is very easy. It's far too easy to say FDI, etc., is being deterred by BEE. Firstly, the economic data tells you that the evidence on FDI and growth in developing countries is in any event ambiguous, right? The money that we should be talking about that needs to be reinvested for growth is the 1.5 trillion minimum, right? And this is our data that we did about 2018. That's sitting in retained earnings in the JSE, right? That's the money that ought to be reinvested. What are they doing? They're buying shares and they're also buying Ferraris, right? The big CEOs. That's the conversation. That's where the money for the investment that we all need is lying.
Phakamisa, I'm going to give you the last word, 1 minute, and then we'll ask the audience if they have any questions.
Thanks, Chair. I think through you, Chair, I think the House now agrees that the big issue is a macroeconomic policy and not a small issue called triple BEE. That something has got to give at a structural level, macro. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I mentioned that in 1902, after the devastating Anglo-Boer War, the Afrikaners were restituted with 3 million pounds, which is equivalent to over 400 million pounds today, given shelter, given stock, given seeds to empower themselves. The country has got to think carefully, in the absence of BEE, what must be implemented to take black people forward. We can't leave black people behind because it's going to cause an unnecessary unrest in this country. Some of us stay in black communities. Just because we are privileged, we know that the violence starts with us. We're not hidden behind a high wall. If my neighbor's hungry, he's going to come for me. Not going to come for Connie. He's going to come for me. Thirdly, you know, again, I'm going to use case studies because the book is based on case studies. 1995, Brimstone wants to invest in Oceania. There was a BEE deal there when that economy was growing. They need 7 million. They go around the Cape Flats. They raise 3 million rands. It was not for free. They raised the money. People bonded their houses. People used their packages. Some were teachers. Some were policemen. They pulled. Some were entrepreneurs. Again, BEE and entrepreneurship are not strange bedfellows. Fred Robertson, the chairman of Brimstone, ran a brokerage firm. He was an investor in a Nando's. He had squash courts. He had run a service station. That's entrepreneurship. His partner, Mustak Bray, had an accounting firm. Some of the funders that funded Brimstone, who were entrepreneurs, ran corner shops. What Triple BEE did is to accelerate black entrepreneurs from the corner shop to the boardroom. And that gave them a lot of teachings on how to govern companies. And many of those people who had the opportunity to ascend, not all of them, some of them have had the wisdom and the insight to govern listed companies in a manner that is sustainable for South Africa. Because if you hadn't had those people, many of those companies would have bent down. I'm not doing a Gevaarlijk. I'm not bringing a scarecrow, you know. I'm not bringing a scarecrow, but I'm bringing, you know, case studies here. When the large conglomerates found it unnecessary to mine a small mine because they thought it was crumbs, instead of those mines closing, it was triple BE players that came in and said, we will work with those crumbs rather than closing them. And out of those crumbs, people were employed and the wealth of people started growing. By the way, that is how Patrice started. You know, instead of leaving a mine dump, you know, you use BE because, let's face it, with business, sometimes your business gets so big that certain operations aren't useful to you. That's how you can plug in triple BE. I want to close in with another case study here. After Brimstone bought into Oceana, they didn't become passive. They went to also acquire other fishing entities like your Sea Harvest. They didn't become passive. Like I said, they changed. They provided insight to make the company operate sustainably. And I dare say even took their operations globally. You know, there is a small example in the book of a gentleman called Bongan Mavum. He was a manager at Oceana, ordinary manager. He now runs his own fishing company. And part of that fishing company has been funded by the same Brimstone. It's in the annual reports, it's in a loan, it's governed. So I'm saying when we say we must remove something, that is a small factor in a larger macroeconomic issue. What must we replace it with except fire in this country? And you know, and non-cohesion. I want my kids I don't want my kids to discuss PE. I honestly don't want. I want them to live in a country where my daughter can walk with a white boyfriend or an Asian boyfriend or whoever, or a girlfriend if they want, without us being constrained, you know, by these issues. And by the way, the Chinese are investing madly in this country. With BE, they are putting their trucks on the ground. I don't know which Chinese is saying they are constrained. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Pakamisa. That was the last word. Except if somebody wants to ask you a question. Are there any questions? At the back there.
Thank you. Thank you, Pakamisa. Thank you to all of you here. Pakamisa wrote a book about us. Just a question to the doctor, who's not a doctor, Dr. Connie Mulder. Have you, because you seem to have a clear focus on black economic empowerment, black people there at the end, corruption at the end. I would just want you to offer you the challenge of just investigating how many white millionaires and billionaires have been created since 1994. Please do that. You can come back to us next year, maybe. Can you come back next year? You can come back. But please do that. Then you also go and look at 2 companies where books have been written about how great the entrepreneurs are, which is about Capitec and about ShopRite. But it's written about those entrepreneurs. It's not written about the market that they serve. That market that they serve was created after 1994. The PEP market, the ShopRite market, the Capitec market. So people have benefited in this democracy. You know, before 94, whenever there was a FINRAN, I can't remember, I'm old enough to know there was a FINRAN. I never knew never had a RAN, but there was a FINRAN. And white people used to take the money out on one RAN and bring it back in another RAN. Corruption was there. Corruption was there then. Go look at the municipalities before 1994 that gave 50 and 100-year leases to white farmers. Corruption was there before a new government. So I would encourage Connie Mulder to do that investigation so that we can have a more equal thing, so that we can move towards this new society that benefits all. The society must benefit all of us. I just came back from a business trip where I sold fish to Norwegians, to the Spanish, to Greeks. My grandfather was a fisherman, throwing a line overboard in Cork Bay to catch snook. My father used to sell snook off a bakkie, go door to door. To put myself through college, I was a teacher, trained as a teacher, I sold kreef, not poached. We've already taken off the tails and kreef doppies. That's how but now I'm chairman of one of the biggest fishing companies in the country. But not only of that, all our employees are shareholders. Our skippers are treated with respect. They run vessels, they take out 200 million rands worth of a vessel the skipper takes out. He's been empowered to do that. Before that, he was always just a laborer on it. And they had external skippers taken. So I'm just saying, I know it's a long story, I speak as long as Pakamisa. But there's a different narrative. To start Brimstone, I had to go take out a loan of 25,000 rand from Investec. They didn't want to give me a loan. They gave it to Mustak because he was a professional. They said, he's an insurance broker. I don't have money. But the principle was, as I told Mustak when we started, we're not going to take other people's money if we don't have our own money on the table. So there are different ways of doing things. And we have different challenges now. But that challenges we can only solve if we work together and not just criticize. Let's go ask Rassie how we did it. And not just quote some ref. Ask Rassie how he brought a nation together instead of asking AfriForum how to divide a nation. Let us all do it together. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've indulged me too long enough.
Because that was long, your answer has to be short. Has to be short.
Firstly, congratulations on what sounds like a remarkable success story. I'm sure lots of extremely hard work went into that, and a lot of sacrifices, as all entrepreneurs make. I'm not quite sure what you want me to answer on, for the simple reason we have done we have done lots of research on all of this. Our members, and maybe I should just start with that, is I work for Solidarity, the trade union. Our members earn it's 30,000 rand household average per month. 75% of members won't survive 1 month without salary. We're not the elite. We're not Stellenbosch. We're Pretoria West. That's where our members are. And if you read the studies, those are people who are really struggling to make it at the moment. And then you've got a government that says, no, we need to do black people rather than poor people. And that's why Solidarity's position from the start has been, let's help poor people. We're vehemently pro ESOPs, employee share ownership schemes. We say that's a great way of doing ownership. But why would you bring race into that? Why not just help poor people? We can do it that way. We've got means tests, we've got NSFAS tests, etc. Let's go that direction. Let's help the people who actually need help. Because what's happening at the moment is we're saying black and the marketing department is the township, but the people who benefit are Brenterian, etc. Let's do poor economic empowerment. We might need to look at the acronym. It's not going to work, but let's go that direction much rather. And that is what we've been repeatedly stating is let's change it to means. Our whole settlement with government, and that is why we never got. The time ran out, but we never got to what we actually proposed. So it might sound like we only criticize, but do remember we reached a settlement with government in 2023 regarding employment equity, where we went to NEDLAC, we negotiated, and we finally came to the conclusion that the way to solve this is by not only looking at EAP and race, but broadening it, saying, let's look at means, let's look at income, let's look at all of these measures that would rather determine who it is. We took the youth employment scheme to court for the simple reason they decided, and it's a wonderful initiative, we need to help unemployed youth, which is something that we're behind 100%. So you have to be young, young is relative, below 35. You have to be unemployed for 18 months, wonderful. And then for some reason, but you also have to be black. And now we're standing with members in Danville who are asking, look, I'm a car guard. I would really like to get into an internship, but I'm white, and I'm never not going to be white. How do I do that? And I'm not convinced, if you tell me that it is absolutely critical for social cohesion and the Rassi and winning in South Africa, that we need to discriminate against young, unemployed white people. I'm not convinced that's true. I don't think that's the direction we should be going. Where we should be going is let's get people into the economy. Let's get more labor ownership of markets, 100%, and let's sort out our low dynamism in the economy, which it is. And it's a problem with an over-regulated environment. So I'm very glad. I would just like to add, from what I can tell from your the way that you speak and your story, I think you would have succeeded regardless of whichever policy. I think you're a successful businessman.
Yeah.
I disagree with you entirely. My home was bulldozed in District 6.
I'm truly sorry.
My family was destroyed and thrown across the Cape Flats.
Okay.
Takes a long, long time, generations to recover from that. Go out on my community on the Cape Flats and see that they are still not recovering because there was fed with drugs by the police before.
Okay.
So I agree with you, we've got to work together. I agree with you that we mustn't discriminate with our youth. But the fact is, there are more black people in South Africa than white people. That is
Yes.
just a fact of life. But we've got to get people together and not divide them. We've got to get people together and not divide them. And what I'm saying AfriForum is doing is dividing us.
Okay.
And that is wrong. They've got to be part of the solution going forward.
Okay. Can I? Yeah.
That's just, it's very simple. We don't discriminate with
Kan ek dit
people,
geantwoord? Hè?
our people, but there is a reality that is out there, that's in our population.
Firstly, I'm truly sorry what happened to your family home.
It's not for you to say sorry, don't worry about it.
No, well, it's an empathetic story. It's a horrible thing to happen to anyone. No one should lose their home. Right? It's simply put. You're right. The fact of the matter is the majority of people in South Africa are black. That's a stat that I think we can all agree on. I don't think we're going to argue about that. In terms of dividing the country, be very wary for only reading the English media or the media reports about AfriForum, because I'm not from AfriForum, I'm from Solidarity. It's a sister organization, but we're close enough that I can understand. We have repeatedly been trying to be part of the solution. Just a couple of examples. Firstly, when we had a problem with employment equity, before going to the courts, we first reached a settlement with government. In terms of BEE, I've repeatedly spoken to the Black Management, to the BEE Commission. We've had people speak to the Black Management Forum stating what our problems are. We're trying South African solutions every single time. On the AfriForum example, AfriForum officially, I think it was 6 years ago, went to Northwest, which is one of the most dysfunctional provinces at the moment in South Africa, and said, we want to see the ANC there. We saw it was still Suprama and Mapelo, and we said, look, we've got neighborhood watches, we've got task teams, we can solve your water crisis. Just allow us into the water plants. We can solve the water crisis. And the ANC said, no thank you, you're white, and left it. So now the question is, we have a long history of being part of trying to be part of the solution. We offered Eskom in the middle of load shedding. We gave them a list of 300 ex-Eskom engineers who were at that moment solving energy crisis for the Philippines, Dubai, the Qatar, the Emirates, etc., who offered to come back. They said, we would come back because we worked on these stations and helped them run. We're not interested. We actually spoke to several of them. I said, I'm not interested in a long career. I'll do a 5-year thing. One of the requirements for me to come back is there needs to be somebody who I train to do this afterwards. That's solidarity. That's who we are. Our members slept in the power stations to keep the lights on. So when you say divide, that's a media narrative. We're desperately trying. Who we don't agree with, And that is true, and they know it. We don't agree with the ANC, and that is why we really love this country, but we do not like the government. Most likely, I see you've asked a question, sir. We do work well together with, is we've got a whole intercultural network at the moment. We've got very good relationships with several traditional leaders and several low-level, you would have municipalities, and where we do have memorandums of understanding, and we help to fix potholes, to make sure that the water is clean and drinkable, and to reduce crime. As AfriForum as a whole, I think it's in Mamelodi, they've got a neighborhood watch agreement with, I can't remember the taxi organization's name, but where AfriForum and the taxi organization would patrol the neighborhoods together to ensure that the crime is lower. So South Africa's story is vertically, well, we don't have good relations. Quite simply put, we don't like the government, we don't like the ANC. Horizontally, we get along very well. And the challenge that we are going to have to face, as everyone here, is how do we get the politicians to realize that we don't hate one another, we actually like one another, and we want to live together. How do we solve that problem?
Okay, Tandu's going to have something to say then.
Yeah, I mean, I would
Pakamisa will say
much-
something, and then we've got one more question.
Just the other side of the income level of the white worker you're talking about. The wage is set by the firms. And so I can see how, and I've seen some of the work that the union does. Maybe we're pointing the gun in certain directions, and we're pointing it in certain things that are done by the ANC, etc. Come, let's walk together and also point it at Sandton, because that's where a lot of value in our economy sits. And if we can unlock that and get all of those firms, all of the kind of leading controllers of power in our economy to work with on this project, right? I think we'd have a very different economy. In any event, the main point I wanted to make was that one of the first things that Rassie and Jacques said when they came in, just to run with the rugby narrative, is they said we're not going to compromise on transformation. Just by the way, right? Because they said it matters to us. We're going to be more competitive when we're more diverse. They said we want to have a Mapimpi on the field. And they went and found them. They went and found Lukhanyo Am. And now we've got white kids in schools today saying Lukhanyo Am is one of my favorite players, right? And I think that's the tale we want to be able to tell. We mustn't pick which parts of the story about race and transformation that we like. We must do it footstoots across the board, right?
Kamisa, you wanted to say something, and then we're going to have one more question. Yes.
Swart economies bemagtiging. That's what we
It's
debate
mouthful.
here. Yes. All I want to say is, please buy the book. because in the book you will see how Swart economies bemagtiging benefited people in this country non-racially. Brimstone had black and white employees. Brimstone had black and white board members. When Brimstone did deals, they went to empower banks that were controlled by white people. They went to empower many institutions, and the evidence is here that BE has empowered people at a non-racial level. Please buy it and I'll sign it.
Oh, nice free ad. The last question.
Cheapest. Questions. I'm going to make a few statements and I might get to a question. Under apartheid, unemployment was sitting between 5 and 13% over the period. One of the statements you made earlier was that as long as South Africans have jobs, the country works or is good or works, whatever you say, something like that, is an argument for why we must increase employment in the country. There is clear evidence just from a South African historical point that even while employed, the country can still be in shambles. And so how we get people employed matters, is the point I'm trying to make. Sorry, how we get people employed matters. It doesn't just come down to as long as we get people employed. And so the social cohesion question that's being spoken, or matter that's being repeatedly referred to, is critical when you're trying to talk about even getting people to jobs or getting people to be better entrepreneurs and that kind of thing. Just as a point to make on that one. The second point is that we keep trying to pretend like we don't have a horrible history as South Africa and that we don't need to right those wrongs. South Africa was a nonsense country for the longest time, and not just the 50 years of apartheid, the 300 years before that. And so to sit here and pretend like we don't need to do something to right those historical wrongs and just go, we're here now, everybody must just be treated as equal, is in a sense a fallacy, especially as has been pointed out when we are living in a country that is majority black and in a country where majority of the poor and disenfranchised and hurt remain black. So there is a need, whether it's in the form of BEE or something else, to find a way to deliberately get that group that has been so painfully hurt historically to be unhurt, for lack of a better word. And the economy is not a small part of it. And what we do with that economic stuff is critical. And part of the challenge, and I think that's what he's pointing out, is even in the things and the people that I'm gonna clump you with AfriForum Solidariteit as a grouping. Even in your approach to assisting or working with other people, you still insist on separate development, essentially. So even when you're going to the tribal groups, you're going, how can we help you become a group that sits over here by yourself while we sit over here by ourselves? Which is part of one of the what's that town in the Northern Cape? Oranje guys have tried to do as well, right? Like, you guys are Zulu, you guys are San, let's get you guys chiefs, da, 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 and we just can't seem to get any white grouping in the country to go, how do we get a country where all black and white can work together in the way that Rassie has been given to do that? And so, and even in the stats that you give, it's like the idea in South Africa that corruption is black is crazy. Like, just if you think about government is black, private sector is white. The people who do the corrupting is the private sector. So they're white people very involved in the corruption. But the conversation always makes it seem like the ANC black government is the reason there's corruption in the country. No one wants to speak about the corporate players who are sitting there doing the corrupting of those government guys. So there must be a conversation around how do we fix even that. And then with regards to BEE itself specifically, a big chunk of the reason that BEE has failed is resistance by white corporates to that thing. They sit there finding ways to ensure that they get loops around it instead of just going down to how do we get more black employees who are good at their jobs to come and work in these companies. They want to find some other SOE or some other whatever to try and loop around the basic simple thing of there are black people in the country who have the skills that need to be employed, and if we employ them, the company will do well, the country will do well, and so we need to have those numbers put out. Where is it? And it's part of, you try to ask the question, what are the frictions that are, or the barriers to entry? Some of them are simply, if I'm not Johan van Niekerk, I can't go and speak to Piet van Tonder about this great idea that I have and needs funding, because he immediately goes, your name's Thulani Futsek, essentially. So but we can't quantify that stuff. And so it makes it seem like we are creating this bogeyman that is BEE and pretending like it is failing simply because it's BEE and not about all the other factors that go into ensuring that it fails in order to try and avoid righting historical wrongs. And we need to find a way to go, okay, there was a screw up, how do we fix this and do it together so that we have a Springbok-esque South Africa in future? I don't know if there's a question there, sorry.
No, thanks a lot. It's a statement actually, but there's someone else. Maybe we should have one last question because they need the venue.
Goeiemorgen, good morning. Congrats with a wonderful discussion. I'm very excited about the Rainbow Nation, the coalition government of 10, 11 parties going forward. I think that's a very good way to go. From what I've been hearing, maybe the color seems to be the problem. Maybe it should simply be economic enhancement or something like that, economische bemachtiging, and more be based on income and not on the color, because the country has developed in a situation today where from the different color groups you do get poor people, you do get people sleeping on the streets, you do. They're all colors there. The Rainbow Nation is on the streets. So it seems to be a problem, the color more than anything else. I think if it all could suddenly be green, that would be sorted out.
Yeah, the Marxists say that you should actually, capitalism
it
is the
should
problem.
be about income,
Not
not
colour,
about
capitalism.
color. But congrats, it's a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much.
The one last one there. We can talk about this the whole day, it seems. The very, very last one, yeah.
Mr. Chairperson, I just want to, the only word that I heard this morning, and I really want to emphasize that, radical changes. If we're not going to do a radical change in South Africa, we are not coming to where we are supposed to be. Transformation. I want to emphasize this. The transformation, just last night, I don't know if you know this, Stellenbosch University was in Parliament because they're struggling with transformation. They're struggling, a university number 3 in the world, struggling with transformation. Here we are, and we are struggling implementing the BEE, and we need to come together. We need to start from grassroots. And I don't like Julius Malema, but you know what he was saying, and that is what I always think about. He was saying, why must we meet the Merim in the kitchen and not in grade 8 or grade 1? Because if we started from grassroots and from the school level, I think we are going to find one another. We need to start from grassroots. And that is, we are confused because of the color, and I want to echo that what my friend is saying here, the color. So I want to start my new party by saying, Foka Party. But I'm going to confuse people. And I want to ask today, thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. And I want this to happen more so that we can become empowered, enlightened, and we can go further as a South Africa, one South Africa, and then we will reach our goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was the last question statement that we've made. But thanks a lot for your attendance and for the way you interacted with our guests. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all our guests, Connie, Tandu, and Pakamisa. Thanks a lot.